that's our big swing target out there. Hey, if the district produced 175 million ounces of silver in the past, we're stepping out big and trying to hit big. Now what we need to do is find, where the sweet spot of that veining is. Where does it blow out to that, that old Belmont vein, 10, 12, 15 meters. And, once we're onto that, then we'll start to get really, really excited.
Well, hello, welcome to Assay TV. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Galen McNamara, who is the CEO and director of Summa Silver. Summa are focused on two projects in the United States. They have the Hughes Project, which is in and around the historic Belmont Mine in Nevada, and also the more recently acquired Moggion Project in New Mexico, where exploration is already underway. Galen, great to see you here today. As I mentioned, you have two projects there. Let's start with the Hughes Project, owned by Howard Hughes. Yeah, can you give us a little bit of a history of the project there and the work you've done today?
Yeah, sure. That's actually a really interesting place to start. So, the property was formerly owned by Howard Hughes in the 1970s before he died. He was a really visionary guy, and he really saw this whole commodities thing, decades and decades in advance of a lot of other people. But of course, he died before he could really see that through to fruition. But what we've done since acquiring the property in 2020 is, this is a district, this is a property that, historically the district itself, it's called the Tonopah Mining District. It's in central Nevada, produced something like 175 million ounces of silver and almost 2 million ounces of gold at grades of like 1,260 grams per ton silver equivalent. So we don't have the entire district, but we have, say, the eastern half of it. So really, what we've really tried to do since acquiring this property is, number one, come up with some really interesting drill targets. I'm a geologist by trade, and I've been through this process several times before. And that when you go into these historic districts, especially as fabled as this one, and you spend the time to put all of the historic data back together, you come up with some really interesting targets. So that's really the first thing that we did right off the hop. And then after that, we really, tested the best of those targets and hit some pretty interesting intercepts. Grades in excess of 1,000 grams per ton, locally in excess of 11,000 and almost 12,000 grams per ton silver equivalent. And all of that we're finding now is over 4 target areas, over a strike length of about 3.5 kilometers, where, hey, the zones are open, and we're just in the process now of trying to understand what we have on our hands. And that's really what we're going to try to do in 2022. So for us on this project and on the other project in 2022, the goal this year is the first 43-101 resource estimates, really from the first work that's been done here, certainly the first modern work that's been done here, and probably the first work that's been done in, the better part of 100 years.
I mean, just for people who don't know the history of the mine, sort of mining closed down in, was it the 1920s? Shut down? Yeah,
so the heyday for this district was probably, the 1910s to 1920s, and really shut down after that, and then finally completed right around 1950, shut down for good. And since then, no real exploration, no real looks at this place at all, because, in places in Nevada, that was right around the time when those big Carlin style, big open pit gold mines were getting discovered. And for several decades, those were so lucrative. So, really in Nevada, people only wanted to find things like that, and that's really all that got explored for. But that paradigm is now kind of shifting back to looking for these underground high-grade deposits because they have been overlooked.
I mean, can you tell us a little bit about, the Belmont Vein, and it ends in a fault. Are you looking for the other side of that, the other side of that fault, where the vein might continue?
Yeah, exactly. So that's, half the story of this property is that one of the best, if the not best, individual veins in the district, and there was dozens of them, was called the Belmont Vein. And it was in the Belmont Mine, just to keep it really simple. And this vein produced something like 40 million ounces of silver that we know about. Of course, old records are incomplete. But it got up in places was 12 to 15 meters wide. And then it disappeared into this fault zone to the east. And one of the things that, we've been trying to do with our compilation work and our geological studies is try to find the eastern extension of the entire district, including the Belmont Vein. And we had a hole from 2020 that was a 1.3 kilometer step out from this old mine. that hit 6 zones of mineralization. Narrowish, but the best one was 2 meters of 500 grams per ton silver equivalent, and some very, very strong hydrothermal alteration. So that's our big swing target out there. Hey, if the district produced 175 million ounces of silver in the past, we're stepping out big and trying to hit big. Now what we need to do is find, where the sweet spot of that veining is. Where does it flow out to that, that old Belmont vein, 10, 12, 15 meters. And, once we're onto that, then we'll start to get really, really excited.
Absolutely. And so for 2022, a lot more drilling ahead, yeah? And you're looking towards sort of getting a resource estimate out at some point, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So a resource estimate on this project, but also a resource estimate on our other project in New Mexico.
Well, let's talk about that Moggion in New Mexico. Tell us a little bit about how you came to acquire that project and what you've done so far with your early exploration.
Yeah, so we acquired that project off of Allegiant Gold, another Canadian junior, in August of 2020. We always liked the southwestern U.S. We always liked these historic Wild West mining camps that hadn't really seen any modern exploration. And this one just really fits that bill. Produced between the 1880s and 1942, and it only shut down in 1942 because that's when the U.S. went into World War II. So that's really when all silver and gold mining stopped in the U.S. for a few years. Was forgotten about until the 80s, and then was drilled in the 80s with a few holes. And the one area that we really like that we're actually drilling now had dimensions on the vein of about 500 meters by about 300 meters. Where 9 holes averaged 12 meters of 506 grams per ton silver equivalent, and now, hey, we can't use those in a quote unquote compliant 43101 resource estimate, but what they do give us is like the perfect roadmap to step up and start drilling right away and building ounces right away. So that's really what we've started now. We started drilling that last fall. And the first hole, and we've announced this, the first hole intersected a 50-meter wide vein. And you can see the photos of that on our website. Now, we don't expect to be completely mineralized, but there's sections that are obviously very well mineralized, just based on what we can see in the core and pointing an XRF at it and putting it right on the core.
And that's the Queen vein, right?
That's right. That's the Queen vein. But the interesting thing about that is, like, okay, that sounds great. 500-meter strike length, the first drilling area. There's 34 kilometers of vein and potential structure on the property. The vast majority of which just hasn't really ever been looked at, apart from very historic mining.
And you've done a sort of follow-up sampling program, yeah? Can you tell us a little bit about the results of that?
Yeah, exactly. So one of the first things we did, because we didn't even have any of this data, there wasn't any surface data. It's a great historic vein field that had no surface data, no samples. So what we did this summer was we just, spent a lot of time sampling as many veins as we could find in the district. We actually flew a LiDAR survey, which is basically a helicopter laser-based survey, to see where all the old historic, pits and trenches were, so we could just save time and go and sample them right away. And what we found over an area of about 3.5 kilometers by 3.5 kilometers, there's extensive high-grade mineralization, often exceeding 1,000 grams per ton, sometimes exceeding 5,000 grams per ton. And, so that's just, that's just presents, I think, a really good opportunity to follow up on and hopefully continue to make discoveries here, in the coming years.
Have you got any ideas sort of how many meters of drilling you're planning for the upcoming year?
Yeah, so in total, it's 35,000 meters. It's about 25,000 meters to Moggion in New Mexico and about 10,000 meters to Hughes in Nevada.
Fantastic. And I guess all this exploration, it costs a lot of money. How's your finances looking? And you've recently done a fundraise, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. So we're just closing a fundraise now. We announced a couple Fridays ago, we announced $6 million. On the same day, we upsized to 10 and closed the books right away. So we'll be very well financed going forward. And the thing I always say about financing is, like, you need to be kind of fit for purpose. A lot of times, and I've been in this situation before, hey, you've got 1 rig, 2 rigs, which is where we're at now, and you get some very strong results, and all of a sudden you decide you want 4 or 5 or 6 rigs, and that requires a different, level of funding. So that's kind of, I'd say we're flexible with what our needs are.
And who was involved in the funding?
So yeah, that's a good question. So, I'm happy to say that both Eric Sprott personally and First Majestic Silver are participating in that and leading that financing.
Excellent, fantastic. And so on both of those projects, just to recap, I mean, a lot of drilling ahead, and you're going to be looking to get resource estimates out by the end of 2022, yeah?
Yeah, that's correct. That's our corporate goal for this year is resources by, late Q4 and 22. Hey, look, we need to drill 75 holes, give or take, into zones of known high-grade mineralization, and that's what we're going to do all year, and that's it.
Absolutely. And in terms of the sort of the silver market at the moment, how are the sort of investor community and everything looking at silver at this time?
Well, silver is a commodity I think that you can do well on in a couple ways. The first one is really with this whole inflation thing. Precious metals are typically a hedge against inflation, as everyone knows. But you look at the most recent CPI prints, and geez, they're 7+%. Hey, if they calculate the CPI today the same way they did in the 80s, I think we'd be looking at like double that or something. So that's a serious concern. The other point to make with silver especially is that it's now really this ESG metal in that it gets used extensively in EVs, especially for large scale rollouts, and a little bit in every car, but a lot of cars go a long way. And then also in solar panels, a little bit in every solar panel, but a lot of solar panels go a long way. So, it really is emerging as a kind of a double-edged sword to do well.
Often overlooked as a sort of energy transition metal, yeah?
It has been, but I'd like to hope that's changing.
Absolutely. Well, exciting year ahead for the company. Lots of drilling. We look forward to sort of catching up with you later in the year when you've got some results coming back in.
Sounds great. Thanks very much, Leo.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Galen McNamara of Summa Silver.